welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and back with me, as always, is our Chief of Research, Derek Cohen. Derek, you missed the Girl Power episode. How upset about it are you?
Quite. I mean, unfortunately, though, and Ariana rightly identified the fact that, you know, there's definitely a pecking order in the comedic standings in the office.
For sure, and you're at the top.
Yeah. I was about to say now the obligation to actually be funny is there. But no, I listened to the episode. It was really great, and I thought you had a really good conversation. I didn't know that incoming Representative Luther was a former teacher.
Former teacher.
Yeah, that was a very useful discussion y'all had.
So if you missed that episode, run back and go check it out. But we are moving forward with this episode. Right at the top, we'd like to give our hot take. We're very excited about this episode, by the way. We've got a good friend of mine and a guest who's going to talk about national politics. I know we say all the things that move Texas here, the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. But there's been so much national news that we're going to have to devote an entire episode to that. So I had a friend of mine from DC is going to be on with us here shortly. But the hot take right off the top, big news today, particularly for us here in the South, very important. Southwest Airlines is now getting rid of their cattle call procedure and going to assigned seats. How will that affect your travel plans, Derek?
Me personally, not much. I'm ever since the COVID era, I've been a Delta guy. But when we were working with the Trump administration on First Step Act, we were in DC probably once or twice a month. And in doing so, you get to that A-list preferred.
There you go. Yeah.
Where, you get to board in like the first 15.
That's right.
And you act, you
it's about as elitist as we get, it's like the A1 through 15.
Yeah, on Southwest Airlines.
Right.
Yeah, you don't have to pay the $8 to connect to the internet when you're an A-list preferred. But that being said, I'm going to miss that because, they had such a predictable schedule getting to D.C. They had like 3 or 4 directs a day and back, and now we just have the 12 o'clock out and the 4:40 back. And
I liked how it just kind of forced you to be social. You had to be like, hey, where are you in the line? And I guess and then you go have drinks after the flight.
I didn't like that one bit, being social in an airport.
All right, moving on. Our shameless plug at the beginning, of course, as always, our fantastic weekly newsletter. It's called The Post. There's always some exclusive information in there. It's kind of a recap of everything we're working on here at TPPF, and there's always something funny and Texas related. So if you're not a subscriber to it, go to texaspolicy.com/thepost. All right, let's get to the reason why we're all here. Our guest is Chris Bedford. Chris Bedford is the senior editor for politics and the Washington correspondent for Blaze Media. Another shameless promotion. You definitely go sign up for Bedford's weekly-ish column. It's at theblaze.com/Bedford. It's called the Beltway Brief. Chris, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Southwest is something I used to fly all the time. I couldn't have gotten home from college if I hadn't been able to take the subway all the way to the end of the Green Line, then hop a bus, then hop a Southwest airline to New Hampshire's airport, which back then still had a smoking room. It was kind of like a great trip back up to the Northeast. But I did get tired of having to fight ultra-aggressive 76-year-old women who'd throw a sharp elbow in front of you. They'd have a C pass, you'd have an A pass. They're daring you to challenge them. But this last week in Milwaukee, they saved my butt. I'm going through the Milwaukee airport, leaving the Republican convention. 10,000 people are stranded. 4 airlines are flying at a Milwaukee airport. Only one of them, Southwest, hasn't updated their system that they run on in probably 20 years. So the hack the screw up doesn't affect them. Everyone else is laying around looking like Baghdad, and I'm just boarding my plane, sitting in the middle seat, and happily going home. So maybe I'm back to being a Southwest guy.
The advantage of not moving on from Windows 95.
Absolutely. Yeah,
exactly.
Same thing happened to me. I cruised through. I thought like they had canceled everything because, there was barely even any TSA there to pat me down. So thank you, Southwest, for that, but we'll see how the transition goes. Okay, Chris, we brought you in to talk about national politics because I feel like 3 years worth of politics has happened in the last 2 weeks. So I don't even know where to start. You mentioned the RNC, and I would love to talk about that, but that feels like a year ago compared to everything that's been going on. But honestly, right? The most recent news, I think, which would be interesting because you're covering it, are the DC riots that are going on right now. There was a big demonstration yesterday at Union Station. They were vandalizing. They ripped down the American flag, and there was video of people burning it and all that. But you were right there. You covered that. Tell us what the latest is on the DC riots.
Yeah. So yesterday or Wednesday, the protests came down. They different groups put maggots and roaches or maggots and crickets into the hotel, the Watergate Hotel, where Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, was staying. They attacked police officers at Union Station. There's video that Julio Rosas from The Blaze got of one of the officers being dragged by their body armor away from the scene where the officer tries to arrest someone. I went down this morning. There was a text message thread started last night of about a couple hundred local DC Republican staff and national congressional staff and teachers from the nearby college. Hillsdale's got a campus nearby who are coming down to try and clean up the graffiti that was all over the place. Now, by the time folks got down there, the Park Service had roped it all off. They got right down to it. They were using pretty hazardous chemicals to take this off. But it was just striking to see the monument to Christopher Columbus, the national monument, have a giant red heart on it that looked like it was bleeding at this point with Hamas written beneath it, or the warning on the Liberty Bell replica that says Hamas is coming. These people aren't just saying, hey, help spare the children and the women and the innocents who are in Gaza. They're coming out as explicitly pro-Hamas. And it's causing a lot of trouble for Democrats. I mean, like you said, it seems like the last 3 weeks have been a year in politics. My wife is so ticked because she wants to just watch Love Island with me at the end of the day, which is like this really trashy Scottish TV show where they do experiments on 18-year-olds. And I haven't been able to do it because I've been working till 10. I've been working weekends. And the week started last week was the Republicans were at a completely massive high tide of enthusiasm. It seemed like the election was going their way. People who probably said they were never going to vote again were ready to vote again. And then after Sunday's surprise, tweet from Joe Biden, which was basically the equivalent of leaving a Post-it note on the fridge that you're not going to run for president again, and then the endorsement of Kamala Harris, suddenly you've got a whole sea change of Democrat enthusiasm, at least in the Acela corridor. I think it might not be felt in the swing states. You see $350 million in a mixture of hard and soft money raised in 48 hours, which is unheard of in global politics for this campaign. And Democrats are super excited. They're going to have the Netanyahu thing. They're going to have the big speech. They're going to have the Olympics to distract the American people. And before you know it, they're going to have the coronation of Kamala Harris and $1 billion campaign just in the middle of August.
Well, let me unpack a few things there because I don't want to get too far ahead. Biden did. You're right. He left the Post-it note on Sunday, which was very strange. And then there was a whole "Where's Biden Hidin" 72 hours, where there was some conspiracy theories about whether or not he was even still with us. But he did show up last night on TV, and he said, "quote I have decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation, fresh voices." Yes. Younger voices. He's doing that right now. Like he finally decided right now to do that.
100 days out.
Yeah, 100 days out. What do you make of that excuse that he's just now decided? You know what? It's probably better to have a fresh face who can string two sentences together.
I mean, if you're a police officer looking at this situation, and it was a domestic situation where grandpa disappeared for 5 days after posting a cryptic message and then appeared looking frail and slurring slightly, didn't explain anything, and said it was time to give all his money away to the kids, you might be suspicious of this. Joe Biden, if you're in D.C. politics and you do this for a living and you're a professional Democrat, this may all seem totally normal. Look, Joe Biden just passed the torch to the youthful generation 100 days out. He's such a great president. He's accomplished so much that it's time to just hand it down to the younger generation. But if you're a normal, hardworking American who doesn't just believe all the crud you read or follow on Twitter, you would have watched that speech last night and found not a single explanation for why Joe Biden has decided to change his mind. After weeks of battling, after attacking the Obamas, which is something that, even though there's been a lot of fighting between those two families for a while, is not something that usually leaks in the public. After attacking the news stations, after attacking the New York Times, to suddenly fold and decide that you're not going to run, and then to hand it off to Kamala Harris when the original leaks were that wasn't going to be the case, and then to offer no explanation. I mean, I can see why Joe Biden did this. I can see why the family did this. I can see why the Democratic Party kind of forced this and the donors forced this. but I haven't seen any honesty coming from the White House and no explanation that's been given to the American people.
Derek, there's a ton to react to there. What's the thoughts on Biden and all the mess of the last 2 weeks?
No, I think Chris makes a really good point, because one of the things that just watching from Normie Land, I mean, so much as what we do can be considered such, that really confused me was the fact that not only the stridency and the I'm not stepping down, we're in it to win it, so on and so forth, but just the ability to turn on a dime, again, without explanation. We saw here in Austin, we saw Squad Grandpa Lloyd Doggett out there making comments on, that it's time for a younger Now, don't pay any attention to the fact that he's only 2 years younger than President Biden, but we saw that he was out here basically calling for the exact same thing. And I was not part of the group that believed in the overdetermined notion that once the caliber of the names start making the call that it's a fait accompli. But it's just kind of weird that you actually saw the schism within the party playing out in real time. And I think that's going to be a instructive lesson going forward as we see Democrat politics evolve into a place where, you're basically, to Chris's point, going to have a coronation for someone who didn't receive a single electoral vote. I mean, we have the individual, we have Dean Phillips, we have the individual who won Guam or whatever it was. Both of them actually had people cast votes in their name. Nobody cast votes for Harris at the top of the ticket. And so I think that's going to be interesting to see that get glossed over, which, as we know, it definitely will.
Chris, I want to take you back to a time far, far away, to 2 weeks ago when the president was almost assassinated. I'm going to jump through a couple of issues here.
We were so innocent back then.
Just kind of throw it at you because, again, just the last 72 hours has enough to cover an entire podcast. But I do want to get your reaction to at least those series of events where you have the president almost getting assassinated on Saturday. Then on Monday, you have him announcing that J.D. Vance is going to be his vice presidential running mate. And then, of course, you have the RNC and everything that they tried to project and tried to message to the American people, and then culminating in President Trump's speech. So pick one or all of those things and let me know how you thought it went.
Yeah, as I recall, the week started off, I can't remember which came first, the documents case being dropped or the assassination attempt. But you've got a party that was potentially entering the convention in some tumult because of changes to the platform that had been pushed through rather imperiously by the Donald Trump campaign, that had gotten rid of the amendment process, had gotten rid of the subcommittees on the platform fight, and gotten rid of some of the social conservative aspects of the Republican Party's platform. You kind of entered Monday wondering, is there going to be an argument over this? You've seen some bad words traded back and forth. And then you see that incredible and iconic moment where a murderous assassin kills people in the crowd and shoots the president in the head, and the fist pumping in the air with the flag. And all arguments within the Republican Party just melted away. I mean, this is my third Republican convention. And in the previous ones, there's always been some kind of fight. Of course, there was arguments around Mitt Romney. There were arguments. There was still kind of a never Trump movement that had this nerd fantasy that they might be able to replace Trump on the ticket at the Republican convention in 2016 that crested with Senator Cruz's speech and then quickly retreated. There was none of that in 2024. It was incredible amounts of optimism. There was unity. I saw a little bit of cracking around the edges somewhat over J.D. Vance's foreign policy after he was selected on Monday. But if you walked around to the restaurants or bars or the steakhouses that surrounded the convention, you would hear repeatedly people toasting to Senator J.D. Vance, and a great amount of excitement, especially amongst those folks who were really hopeful that the next Trump campaign would be representative of a MAGA movement as opposed to simply representative of the president and the need to win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll jump in there real quick just because I want to make this point. Derek, it seems like to me, my analysis of the J.D. Vance, in addition to him, being a strong candidate, he's new, he's young, he's from the Midwest and all that offers. He obviously has a fantastic personal story that's very famous because of the book and the movie and all of that. But for me, what it really signaled politically is that this might be the first time, at least publicly, signaling that Trump is starting to think about his legacy post White House, that in fact, to Chris's point, that it's not just about the cult of personality, which is kind of a misnomer anyway, but that they are in fact trying to not just develop a movement around Trump and Trumpism, but create something that would endure after he leaves the White House.
No, I think that's right. And with J.D. Vance, obviously the youth is seen as a feature and not a bug. I know that it has given some folks a little bit of heartburn. Usually more of the classically liberal free market folks because of an asymmetry that they have with him on policy. But I try to reassure these folks because again, it's. Nobody's talking about Kamala Harris as border czar. Well, actually, we're affirmatively not talking about it now. But that being said, is the vice president's, thumb on the policy scale is not necessarily a large one. Also, I think that when you actually go from a state like Ohio, I speak educatedly about that. When you go from a state like Ohio to a more national forum, it does tend to moderate your politics. When I say moderate politics, I don't mean in terms of liberal versus conservative. I mean, generally, it shaves a lot of the edges off. And I think that, especially when it comes to issues of labor relations and trade, I think you are going to see a little bit of a reduction there. But I want to jump off. Since we're on the J.D. Vance point, I want to ask Chris this: what the view from the expensive seats are while we're out here in the hinterlands. The coalition, and this is, we could be talking about this for naught, but the coalition that Trump seems to want to build and establish with this selection, do you think that is necessarily going to address some of the issues he has, say with suburban women or any other sort of constituency that might be a little more milquetoast on supporting President Trump? Do you think that this is an additive selection? Is the question.
No, I think this is a selection that's made. It's a strong selection and one that is certainly a motivator and something that kind of will help preserve the intellectual ideas that have built up around Donald Trump's presidency in the last 8 years. But it's one that was made out of strength. And I think that it's one that is probably seriously informed by the near assassination attempt and also by his children who are thinking more along these lines and reportedly pushed behind the scenes for it. Now, Donald Trump in 2016, when he picked Mike Pence, that wasn't from a position of strength. That was a gesture of goodwill to the Christian conservative community around the GOP, those people who were more suspicious of Donald Trump, who looked at Mike Pence as a really stabilizing force, which he largely was in that White House. And when you see him in the selection process, whether he was looking at the governor of Virginia, who is definitely a moderate Republican, who was able to win by getting that white suburban college-educated woman vote from the suburbs back into the Republican camp, people expected him to go that route. J.D. Vance is a sign that as opposed to simply chasing votes, which maybe in Trump's case actually works with most presidential candidates, the VP doesn't matter that much. He wasn't going to do that. And it really showed the confidence that he had gained from the last week or two and the polls that he was going in, that he was saying, I don't really need to pander as much as I would have expected for these votes. The Democrat coalition is starting to fall apart. And it's still, there was a sense of inevitability during the convention that I don't think is real. Kamala Harris, despite all of her many, many, many faults, is still a real candidate. And if the party is able to hide just how incredibly annoying and ill-equipped she is, and she just becomes a young face, the strong black woman standing up against the old white man, then they might actually be able to pull that coalition together and win this election.
So I want to get to Kamala for sure in just a second, but I don't want to skip over. Of course, Thursday was the day that Trump gave his speech of last week, a week ago today. First of all, I mean, I don't know, craziness, insanity, entertainment that preceded that with Hulk Hogan and his speech and doing his shtick, and then of course Kid Rock coming out and
it's Cabinet Secretary Hogan to you.
That's right,
or Belail or whatever it is, yeah.
And performing as well. I went to that was the day that I went to most of the convention, and it was entertaining. I mean, it definitely I had everybody was texting me and can you believe this is going on, and so at least it got the eyeballs. I think that most of these days, other than the actual big speeches at the end of the night, most of the days don't really get a lot of eyeballs on it. I think that they were trying to do that. They did have some really solemn speakers, and I thought Eric Trump really presented himself very well. I think that he gets a bad rap in the media and SNL and all of those kinds of things. I thought his speech was very well done and very well given as well. But then Trump speaks. and he doesn't do your traditional convention speech. He does a very traditional Trump on the stump speech. What did you make of that choice to do his thing, his shtick, in that context at the convention?
I don't think it landed that great. It was two good speeches combined into one speech with the tone of the first. And what you ended up with, I mean, for the average viewer watching at home who just watched the first 30 minutes because it started so late, I think too late, then it was a good moment to see a vulnerable and quiet and introspective Donald Trump sharing the story of an awful day. And that great thing that was shown before talked about before the speech by Tucker and then revisited by Donald Trump about how amazing it was to look up and realize that unlike most times when you hear gunfire in a crowd, no one was running, no one was fleeing. People were standing, their fists were in the air, they were defiant, they were standing with him. That was a really poignant moment and an excellent speech. But usually when you're a politician, especially one that's riding that kind of huge crest, you want to leave the people wanting more. But we had an hour more of the speech where he kind of went into the normal kind of stump speech he would give about his accomplishments here, his accomplishments there. He couldn't resist the urge to mention Joe Biden once, although he explicitly was very proud of himself, wasn't going to mention Joe Biden a single time. He had to. And it lost some of the interest. Now, there was a total freak out on conservative Twitter afterwards. Like, oh my gosh, the moment has been destroyed. Well, that was really overreacting. Mm-hmm. But there's certainly the sense of inevitability that was marching into that with Hulk Hogan and Kid Rock and Tucker and Dana White and the assassination attempt and the dropped case and the fumbling Democratic president did falter a little bit when you had to remember, oh yeah, wait a second. Donald Trump is still a human. He's still a 78-year-old human. He's got his own tics. He's got his own things. And he's also, it really did reinforce the idea that, well, on some levels, he is certainly changed by this. It's impossible not to get shot in the head and not be changed. The same old Trump still lives inside there. Yeah. He's still going to be braggadocious. And honestly, that's a good thing because I was it was approaching midnight by the time we finished taping, and I was looking for something to wake me up for our last coverage.
Derek, do you think that the Republicans did what they needed to do and got their message out?
Yeah, I think so. And I'll just point to Chris's remarks on that, is that the convention itself as a whole, I actually thought was really well done, especially in contrast to conventions of the past. I mean, there was a unified message. It was a positive message. It was a hopeful message. And I echo and underline his point on inevitability. That is probably a punji trap that folks are walking into. But I'll say that the convention itself did check that box. And I even, from folks I know that are fairly apolitical, but maybe have tuned in or caught the clips of Hulk Hogan and Kid Rock subsequently, is that when they started going a little deeper and seeing some of the other things, or maybe even like real coverage, when I say real, REEL, like 5-minute, spray of, different events of that, they actually had cohesively, even in the way it was represented by the mainstream media, a fairly positive outlook on the actual convention itself. Mm-hmm. And that is just something you just generally don't see. So I think that is good. The questions that we still have going forward, and again, are they going to fall for that? Are the Republicans going to fall for that sense of complacency back when they were, running against a vegetable? It's just not going to be that way this time. And Chris mentioned earlier, what did you say, Chris? Something like $300 million? I mean,
$20 million. Let's jump into the Kamala thing right now. It's a good segue into that.
Sure.
Because we got a few minutes left before we get to our 10-minute drill. I want to get into it. So now the race has changed, obviously. Chris, you mentioned the massive haul of money that Kamala has raised over the last 48 hours or so. But also, it's all, the media has been forced to cover the Biden, disaster over the last 2 or 3 weeks. And it's weird. It's almost like now that they've fixed the problem, the media is just like a bunch of wild monkeys just running around around, just giddy and doing all kinds of crazy, memory holding like there was no memory holding. I mean, it's there. All of the things that they said about Biden, all of the things that they said about Kamala Harris, none of that existed as of Monday of this week. And it's just, and now there's all this enthusiasm. Everybody seems to be trying to unite, and the money obviously helps. Where do we go from here with Kamala on the top of the ticket?
Well, that's the thing that's always worth keeping at the front of mind, is that the media's attacks on Joe Biden were not a suddenly finding Jesus and becoming honest. It was a political message. It was, they didn't think that he could beat Donald Trump. They knew he was aging. We all knew he was aging. Anyone who was in the room, anyone who's watching on TV knew that he wasn't the same person he was previously. But then you had Emperor George Clooney and Barack Obama coming out and saying this is over. That was, and the media following suit. That wasn't honesty. That was just partisan hackery to change the candidate. And now they're so shameless. Like you said, they're memory holding the whole thing. When you've got Kamala Harris, for example, every newsletter I got this morning is attacking Republicans who pointed out that Kamala Harris was hired because she fit the criteria of a black female. Now, we know that that was the criteria they were looking for because Joe Biden said so publicly, repeatedly, in interviews and in speeches, that he was going to pick a black female. And I guess he had the serial liar and fabulous from Georgia and Kamala Harris were the only two who were willing to take that job. Mm-hmm. So he ended up with this. You've got the media. Axios had to change one of their stories yesterday because they had a story that came out saying Republicans are trying to pretend that Kamala Harris was the border czar. The only problem is it's not true. They had to update that story to acknowledge that Axios had called Kamala Harris the border czar.
That's interesting.
Which is not her official title, but it's real.
I want to jump in there because the thing that struck me about that particular story about Axios was not that they came out and said, oh, Republicans are pouncing, calling her the border czar. Their correction wasn't, you know what, we were wrong. She was the border czar. Like, the correction wasn't, sorry, she was the border czar. The correction was, Axios made the mistake in calling her a border czar because she never was a border czar, right? Mm. Like, they actually took the hit, Derek, for as
any good soldier would.
Instead of saying, yeah, okay, we lied on our story yesterday, she actually was the border czar. Sorry about that. It was, no, we were wrong to call her the border czar for the last year and a half because, even though that's what she actually was.
There was a series of tweets by a particularly loathsome senator, Chris Murphy from Connecticut yesterday, who took umbrage with Netanyahu referring to some of the protesters as pro-Hamas, and then he tweeted, I believe 6 hours later, about that he's shocked that people were actually affirmatively advocating for Hamas, and so that's. They think that their constituents have the memories of goldfish, and in some cases it seems to be true. Mm-hmm. But the fact that it's seeing it all playing, the amount of time that you're given to let that soak in or to blow away in the wind is becoming infinitely smaller.
Yeah, it's we talk about tribalism breaking people's brains, Chris, all the time, and you definitely see it on the right. I mean, there's an aspect of MAGA where Trump can say something that can be proven to not be true, and yet they just go along with it. I mean, it happens absolutely on the left. It happens in the media. The difference is, I feel like it happens. It may happen with a lot of average American supporters of Donald Trump. It really is the elite. It really is the people in the media. It's the Chris Murphys of the world. These folks will be out there pushing it as well. There was another outlet, Chris, I think GovTrack or one of these other outlets that had put Kamala Harris as the most liberal senator according to their rankings or whatever it was. Before she came VP, they deleted that page. They got rid of it, and of course, the internet is forever. So good luck trying to do that. So just the brazenness of them even to try and do something like that is pretty astonishing.
And you're going to realize just how much the entire apparatus of power is going to swing behind Kamala Harris, how they're going to try and sell her as cool, how TikTok's algorithms are suddenly going to push this idea that Kamala Harris is anything other than an even more cringy Hillary Clinton, one of the least cool people you could possibly see. Republicans can just take clips of her trying to be cool, laughing about smoking pot while she imprisoned people for drug offenses, making up stories about different rappers she listens to who hadn't released their albums when she was in college. You can release the stuff of her somewhat being cool until how uncool it is. And one way you know this, that without the media power, this couldn't happen, is they tried to make Kamala Harris a thing in 2020. There was white liberal ladies from all over the country knitted this little quilt that was a picture, all these little pictures of her face that came together into a giant picture of her face. And they put it down in Washington, D.C. near the waterfront. And that was basically the last of it, because people realized this is actually not a good politician to rally behind. Mm-hmm. This is and the Biden administration, which is completely obsessed with identity politics, now has a vice president who is of Indian and Jamaican descent. Both her parents are immigrants, a female, California, and they hide her in the background. When Gavin Newsom's getting recalled as governor of California, he doesn't call the vice president from California to campaign for him because she is a lead weight. So Democrats have to trick themselves. They don't just have to trick the American people into thinking that she is a good politician. But they might be successful. They've got a lot of resources to bring to bear.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is, but the reality is that, that Joe Biden wasn't a great candidate, and yet he won. He won the presidency as well. And so it's absolutely possible. She's obviously going to have a ton of money. And so to even compete, the Republicans are going to have to ramp it up. So real quick, while we still have you, and I hope you can stay for our 10-minute drill because we got some fun things to talk about. What do you see going forward in terms of how this race now shapes up? Because, it looked like Biden was headed for a complete disaster. The media was trying to push him out. So the normal ratchets of power weren't working in their favor. Now all of that has completely changed. They're going to have their convention next month. I think it's August 19th. So they've got a few weeks to kind of ramp up for that. What do you expect over the coming weeks or so?
So normally the convention would be something to look forward to for our Democrats. It's the moment where the whole party comes together and unified. But I think that they're really tempting the ghosts of fate with this convention. It's the first Democratic convention in Chicago since 1968, which is just coming up completely Shakespearean in all the things that it predicts. In 1968, LBJ had realized he was going to probably lose the Democratic primary, and it's decided in January he was going to step down and not run for re-election. Mm-hmm. Then you had RFK, who was the leading candidate, and a Kennedy, a very liberal candidate who was, after the night he won California, was shot on national television. You had that violence, and it kind of descended into chaos. And what the party ended up doing was just picking Hubert Humphrey, who was the only one of the Democrats who was running, who was still pro the Vietnam War. They ignored the Democratic base. None of the voters were actually consulted. The decision was made by party poobahs. And what you ended up with was an extremely volatile and violent riots and situations outside the Democratic convention, tear gas and the rest, the party basically imploded on national television. I don't think we're going to get 1968 levels of violence simply because you don't have Mayor Daley. You've got the modern Democratic Party, which is no longer willing to defend cities against rioters running Chicago. But you're going to have a huge amount of protest. And what should be that party unification is going to be really show the incredible amount of discord in the party. So really the best thing they have on their calendar is the Olympics. And then 100 days where Kamala Harris gets to go out there in a more traditional campaign style and show that she's presidential, and 100 days for Donald Trump to define his new opponent.
So Americans can unify for at least 2 weeks, Derek, around the Olympics.
Watching the new edition of breakdancing, which I saw is going to be in the this year.
Can't wait for that. All right, so let's jump into our 10-minute drill here. We have just a couple things. Our first segment, as always, is Survey Says. We've got some polling data. The first, just very quickly, the first polls have come out. CNN had a poll. Trump is leading Kamala Harris 49-46. That's basically around where Joe Biden was. Although the notable thing here is that it seems like Harris has closed the gap a little bit, just because Biden was having such a disaster. But the polling data I want to jump out or throw out here, which may be undergird the next 100 days, is just 25% of voters say that their finances are getting better, while almost 40% say that they're getting worse. Mm-hmm. So, that's one of those things, it's the economy, and the economy writ large is kind of a marker for how people think the country is going. Usually it's not that, people, understand GDP and all of that. It's just, it's sort of a litmus test for like how their life is going going. Only 25% say it's getting better, 40% say it's getting worse. Does that? What do you think that bodes for the next 100 days?
Well, that's going to be the interesting thing, because I think that this is where actually the defenestration of Biden actually probably redounds to the Democrats' favor, is the fact that, so many of his unfavorables are attached to his abysmal performance in office, starting all the way back from the Afghanistan withdrawal, hyperinflation going on since, and then obviously, the prioritization of, Democrat spending projects over just the general health and wellness of the economy. And so whether or not those go out the door with him, I think will be interesting to see. But I mean, they're going to try to paint a picture that Kamala Harris is just someone they found on the street, wasn't part of this administration that led to these round negatives.
That's right. So, Chris, there's kind of a double question to Derek's point. Are policies going to matter over the next 100 days? And then even if they do matter to people, such as, the only 25% say it's getting better, does Kamala carry that baggage, or does she get a clean slate?
Right now, it seems like she's starting off with a somewhat clean slate, partially because she was so hidden from view, and partially because much of the corporate media is willing to memory hold that. I mean, the White House was denying that it was responsible for the economy in the first place, and now they'll say, "Hey, oh, look, there's a new person, doesn't have Joe Biden's baggage." We're going to know though in the next week if this polling works. I mean, the announcement of a new candidate and the influx of money ought to be a massive bump. To end up with 1 or 2 points is not that great. And that bump's probably not going to last once the candidate actually gets defined. And at the end of the day, Kamala Harris is going to have to enforce or to defend the policy decisions of the administration in ways that they want to continue them. And also, she's got so many great moments, especially from her 2020 primary run, where you start to see Republican Senate candidates, for example, just stringing together her advertisement, the things that she said about the border, the things she said about crime and riots, the things that she said about guns and taxes, the things she said about DEI, string those together, attach them to the Democrat candidate's endorsement of her, and just run those ads. Because you can delete the scores from the internet, but Kamala Harris is a hyper-liberal partisan lawmaker, and the record stands for itself. So those ads will be killer.
And you are starting to hear more conservative voices say, look, the way to go at this is really to go after the policies and not the character. But we'll see what they ended up doing. Segment 2, lies, damn lies, and statistics. This is where, Chris, we talk a little bit about some research that's out there, and shifting gears a little bit. We're going to talk. We haven't talked about school choice today, which I think is probably going to get us fired. But we are going to talk about the border.
Likely.
We are talking about the border, and this I just want to point out something here. In June, Border Patrol only apprehended just over 87,000 illegal immigrants, which is the lowest number in 3 years. The lowest number in 3 years was just last month. Now, we told you, TPPF, pat ourselves on the back. We told you that this was going to happen in August of last year. We told you that a deal would be made between the Biden administration and AMLO, the president of Mexico / the cartels, that if they started to think that the border crisis was really a drag on his presidency and his reelection, that there would be a deal made to start cutting down the numbers. And here we are. We're in July of the election year, and for the first time in 3 years, it's at its lowest level. That said, that was in June. Since July 1st, when Biden started having his no good, very bad, terrible month, now all of a sudden it looks like that Trump might win. And so what happens? Well, here's the headline from July 22nd. Hundreds of migrants from a dozen countries left Mexico's southern border on foot Sunday as they attempted to make it to the U.S. border. There's a new huge caravan of illegals headed this way. And some of the analysis is either, Derek, either the cartels and the Mexicans decided, hey, Trump's going to get back in office, so we got to get as many people across as we can, becomes Biden's going to lose. Or at the very least, it says they're now trying to use this as another bartering chip with the Biden administration. They've already gotten several concessions for dropping the numbers, but maybe they're using this one as another bargaining chip to say, hey, we got thousands of people on the way. We're going to need some more things unless you want these guys coming across.
Yeah, and I think that that might, I mean, that very well may be the sum total of what is going on. But I think that the way that's going to play out politically is people say, oh, 80,000. Oh, I mean, geez, that's, nobody's reacting to 80,000 illegal immigrants going, oh, okay, well, problem solved.
Right.
That's like the whole thing when you get the Obama White House, I'm sorry, the Biden White House, but I repeat myself, out there saying things like, oh, inflation only went up, 3 points this quarter. And it's like, yeah, but in sum total, that's 12% on the year over 24% on 3 years,
Right.
And the fact is that it's like these number games and the games that like folks out there like Paul Krugman and Robert Reich like to play, essentially think that the Americans are not only illiterate, but they're innumerate. And again, there are people that can be painted with such a brush. But the thing is, I don't think that the entire body politic is, and that I think they're going to see right through that.
Chris, we already talked about this. This is the number one issue for conservatives. The number one issue for in Texas is obviously the border. We were seeing it being the number one issue in Republican primaries as far away as New Hampshire during the primary debate and all that. So border security is still one of the top issues in the country. And then, of course, if Kamala is trying to run away from that, you have this whole thing with her being the border czar and the video of Biden, announcing that she's going to be in charge of fixing the border. Will this play into that over the next 100 days, and can she run from it?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult to run from it. And this is one of the dumbest things that the Democratic Party has done, is allowed these pro-illegal immigrant activists to have such a large voice in their coalition, to the detriment of the unions, to the detriment even to some level of the environmentalists, the detriment of the middle class. This is a catastrophic mistake. And the crackdown that you've seen on the border and the trickle, the lower numbers, is just further proof that the border is not an intractable problem. The administration has the resources and the ability to actually cut down on this. For decades, when you were here stuck in the swamp with me, that Republicans claimed, oh, there's nothing we can do about the border. Well, Donald Trump proved them wrong, even without the House and Senate's help. So the American people could see that at the same time. And because the illegal immigration has gotten so bad, it's a major issue in Massachusetts and in New York and in Michigan and Chicago, where immigrants are taking over school gymnasiums and blocking people, especially poor people, from services and civic centers that they would otherwise be able to use and access. This is something that Kamala Harris, more than anything, can't run from, because the activist base who helped run her will not let her run from it. This is a major issue and something they're willing to fight for.
So we only have about a minute left. What to watch for? I'm really interested to see, just from the communications perspective, sort of the rehabilitation of Kamala. The media, others have not been super kind to her, over the last few years. She's been kind of seen as an afterthought because they all assumed that Biden was going to run again. And so I'm interested to see, again, from the communications, the branding aspect, to see how the media and her campaign and Democrats across the spectrum start to rehabilitate her image, and to kind of see what they produce, and then really to look for how do they present that at their convention. Derek, what are you watching for?
Insurance policy to assurance policy.
Yeah, what are you watching over the next couple weeks?
I'll be really interested to see, and this is definitely more in your lane than mine, but I would like to see just the longitudinal movements of the polls with the swap at the top of the ticket, because I think one of the things that I've thought since the 22 election is that since everyone's all off the sidelines now, there's not a whole lot of movement in the broader electorate when you change some of the exogenous factors, right? So one thing that I think I'd like to see is that if we see a very small to negligible movement in the polls, I think that kind of goes and underscores the theory that like everyone's already baked on this election. So let's just take the cake out and eat it. Chris,
outside of the current riots in your city that are going on and the other issues there, what are you watching for the next week or two?
I'll be watching this afternoon Joe Biden's meeting with Netanyahu to see if he's able to hold it together. Even with the teleprompter, he was slurring so badly in his speech on Wednesday. I'm interested in that. But even though polls have been so wrong for so many years, I'm still addicted to them, just like a political junkie in D.C. And I'm also really curious, what's this bump going to do? What's this change going to do? Is the race going to be fundamentally altered? Where are we going to start to see Trump pull away and Kamala sink? What's the impact of this money? Is Elon Musk going to sit on the sidelines? Reports have varied pretty wildly on that. This is the last 100 days. It's extremely exciting. I've got a baby due on Election Day. I'm hoping my wife can just hold for one more day after that, but I don't think that's up to me. And it's going to be a
You might
wild
want two
season.
for media.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, Chris Bedford, he's the senior editor and for politics and the Washington correspondent for Blaze Media. A good friend of our organization, a longtime friend of mine. So we really appreciate you being on with our podcast today. Definitely go subscribe to his newsletter. Is it weekly? I feel like it's just
3 times a week.
3 times a week. Okay.
I'll sign you up as soon as I'm off, Brian.
Excellent. All right. The Beltway Brief at theblaze.com/Bedford. Chris, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to all of you, as always, for listening and watching and viewing the Right Idea with us. As we like to say at the end of every show, in the words of Sam Houston, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.